When our first family, our first ancestor came to the United States, or came to America, it wasn't the United States, at that time, he came from England. He was 14 years old. He came from the Isle of Wight. And
I've heard of that.
Yes, and you know, the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation happened in the early 1500s.
Yeah,
and you weren't allowed, Henry VIII said nobody can be Catholic under the punishment of death if he caught anybody practicing Catholic religion. So your first and our first ancestor came over in 1830. He was 14 years old, and he caught a ship, came over and landed in what is now St. Mary's County in Maryland. And he worked for Lord Baltimore. He learned, somehow or other, he learned the Indian language, and he was an interpreter for Lord Baltimore. And when Lord Baltimore got ready to pay him off, and they didn't have much money, so he gave him 17,000 acres of land in St. Mary's County, a little town of, I can't even think of the name. What's the little town that we went up where the Boarmans came from?
Yeah.
But anyway, the first thing he did when he got this land, he gave 200 acres to the Diocese of Baltimore.
St. Mary's, wasn't it?
So, no, to build a Catholic church. And Ruth and I, and Royce Boarman, Uncle Wilford's son, and his wife met up there about 20 years ago and stayed a week. And we toured all around and all the cemeteries, and we found a lot of Boarmans buried there. And hardest is...
Really? And you're talking about the mud. There was muds buried right beside them.
And he built this Catholic church, and we went to Mass there.
Oh, you did?
And he lived, the Boarman Manor was right down the road. It's still there. And on down the road, about a city block, is another big old house, and it was Dr. Mudd's house. And you know the story about Dr. Mudd.
Civil War, Dr. Mudd.
During the Civil War, when John Wilkes Booth rode in from Upper Maryland, rode in to assassinate Lincoln, he rode by the Boarman house, and he rode on down to the next house, which was Dr. Mudd's house. And it was night, just getting dark, and he stopped at Dr. Mudd's and asked him if he could spend the night with him, and told him he was an actor, and he was going in to a show in Washington, D.C. In reality, he was going in to assassinate Lincoln. So after he assassinated Lincoln, jumped off the stage, jumped off of the balcony down into the stage, he broke his ankle. Yeah. And when he was escaping, he rode back the same way, and he got to Dr. Mudd's house, and he said, "Hey, he's a doctor. I'll stop and have him set my ankle." And he did. And they implicated Dr. Mudd and almost hung him. And then they did send him to prison, and he was in prison down off in Rat Tortillas, Florida, for 6 years.
Really?
And his name was just cleared by his ancestors. Have been fighting ever since then to clear his name, and he was just exonerated in 1996, I believe.
Is that where the saying comes from?
Oh,
the
yeah,
saying
that's where
comes from?
The old saying, when you were a kid, you know, somebody said, "You better not do that, or your name will be Mud." Well, that's where it came from.
No kidding.
And a lot of people don't realize where it came from. But his name at that time was Mud. So, I mean, and it was always Mud. And he's buried in this St. Mary's Catholic Cemetery.
Any of them in our group that lived to be that old.
He's recording something here, hon. Yeah. She's recording this. And Dr. Mudd is buried in the grave next to our first ancestor, Boarman, in the Catholic cemetery there. And it was quite interesting.
I'd say.
And in about 1780 or 90, a group, 200 families lived around there, and they decided they were going to leave Maryland and come somewhere else, and they came to Kentucky. And it was Boarmans and Hardesties and Weddings and Howards and Thompsons and those names. And the reason they left Maryland was because Maryland had imposed a penalty if you were Catholic. You had to pay an extra 10% surtax, and you were not allowed to hold a public office. So 200 families gathered up and came through the wilderness to Kentucky in about 1790. And Kentucky was a wilderness, you know, the Indians.
Oh, yeah.
And they settled up around Lebanon, Kentucky. And your great-grandfather and my grandfather, George Boarman, was born in Raywick, Kentucky, which is about 10 miles out of Lebanon, Kentucky,
Huh.
in 1864.
Wow.
And then he came down, his family came down to Ohio County, Davis County, and settled there.
Huh.
But it was quite interesting going up there and seeing the old ancestral home and
Does it still say Boarman Manor? Or
oh yeah,
really?
yeah. And we went in the Dr. Mudd's manor, and we also we looked up in the phone book and we found our cousins up there.
Really?
It was a set of twins, Richard and Robert Boarman, and their last name, I can't even recall it now.
Elin.
Elin. And we called them and they had us come over and enjoy it.
How many?
About 10 generations removed, but they were cousins. And their mother was a Boarman, and she married an Elin, but she was so proud of the Boarman name that she named all of her kids middle name Boarman.
No kidding.
So,
Huh. I knew that